I'd been guiding hunters through the northern Ontario wilderness for 15 years when Frankie Phillips showed up. 15 years of tracking whitetail and moose, of teaching city guys how to field dress their kills, of hauling gear through black fly season and freeze-your-spit winters. I knew what a normal client looked like. This wasn't that. The float plane touched down on Kirkland Lake around noon on a Tuesday in late September. I was standing on the dock with my gear already packed, watching the pontoons cut white lines through the water. The pilot was Danny Keogh, same guy who'd been flying hunters in and out of the bush for the last decade. Good pilot, didn't talk much. The plane taxied up to the dock, and Danny killed the engine. I grabbed the pontoon to steady it while he got the door open. That's when I got my first look at Phillips. He stepped out onto the pontoon in one smooth movement. No hesitation, no wobble. Most clients grab for something, test their balance. Not this guy. He was maybe 5'11", compact build, moved with this tight controlled energy that made me think of wound springs. Close-cropped black hair going grey at the temples. Pale face, kind of hollow in the cheeks. His eyes were grey, and they went right through me when we made eye contact. "Zachary Garcia," I said, held out my hand. He shook it. Firm grip. Dry palm. "Frankie Phillips." That was it. No small talk. No comment about the flight or the weather or the lake. Danny started handing out gear, and Phillips took each piece without a word, stacking it on the dock with the same efficient movements. 2 packs, a rifle case, a duffel that looked military issue. Everything in muted greens and greys. I helped with the last of it, and Danny gave me a look I couldn't quite read. Not worry exactly. More like curiosity. He nodded once, climbed back in, and fired up the engine. 30 seconds later, the plane was turning back toward open water. Phillips stood there on the dock looking at me, waiting. "Truck's up the hill," I said. "We'll load up and I'll take you through the route options." Already know where I want to go. I picked up one of his packs. Heavy, well-balanced weight distribution. Professional packing job. "Yeah? Where's that?" "Temagami region. As far northeast as you can take me." I set the pack down. Didn't mean to, just sort of happened. "Temagami's a big area. You got a specific zone in mind?" "The deep section, past Lady Evelyn, where most guides won't go." There it was. I'd had a feeling, standing there watching him move, watching those eyes. This wasn't going to be a normal trip. I should have known from the way he'd contacted me. Email, not a phone call. Minimal information. Just dates and a deposit. I'd figured he was private. Lots of hunters are. "That's rough country," I said. "Not much game up that way." "I know. So what are you hunting?" He looked at me for a long moment. The wind came across the lake and moved through the pines behind us. Finally he said, "I'll pay triple your normal rate." I didn't say anything. Wasn't sure what to say. My normal rate for a week-long expedition was $3,000. Triple that was $9,000 for one trip. Phillips reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Plain white, kind of thick. He handed it to me. "Half now. Half when we get back." I opened it. Cash, all hundreds. I didn't count it there on the dock, but I could tell it was right, just from the weight. $4,500 in my hand. "What exactly are you hunting?" I asked again. "Someone who doesn't want to be found." "Not something. Someone." I looked at the envelope, looked at Phillips. His face didn't give me anything, just that same flat calm. "This legal?" I said. "Completely. I'm a private investigator, licensed in Michigan and Ontario. I can show you credentials." He reached for his wallet, but I waved him off. Didn't really matter if I saw a license or not. Either he was telling the truth or he wasn't, and a piece of plastic wouldn't change what I decided to do. What mattered was the money in my hand, and the fact that he wanted to go into country I'd been avoiding for the last 3 years. Dead country. That's what Marvin Stevenson called it. Marvin had been guiding even longer than me, ran trips out of Cobalt and Haileybury. I'd seen him 6 months back at the outfitters' meet in North Bay, sitting at the hotel bar with Madison Owens, who worked the same territory from the Timiskaming side. Both of them had a policy about the northeast Temagami region. They didn't go there, wouldn't book it. I'd asked Marvin about it once after a couple beers. He'd shrugged, tugged at his thick salt and pepper beard. "Poor game," he'd said. "Waste of a client's money." But Madison had been more direct. "It's dead country, Zach. Nothing moves right in there. Birds don't sound right. Even the bugs are off. I don't book what I don't trust." I'd nodded and changed the subject because I didn't want to seem like I was questioning their judgment. These were people who'd spent decades in the bush. If they said something was off, it was off. But I'd also filed it away as the kind of superstition you run into sometimes with old-timers. Marvin was French-Canadian, grew up hearing stories about Wendigos and loup-garou. Madison was practical as a hammer, but even practical people get feelings about places. I hadn't been back to that section of Temagami since, not because I believed in dead country, just because there were plenty of other places to take clients, places with better game and easier access. But now I was standing on a dock with $4,500 in cash and a guy who wanted to go exactly where I'd been told not to. "When do you want to leave?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning, early." I looked at the gear on the dock. Everything he'd need was already there. He'd planned this, knew what he was doing. "You been in the bush before?" "Yes." "Ontario bush?" "Some. Mostly Michigan and Wisconsin. Boundary waters." That was something, at least. Boundary waters would have taught him about portages and navigation. Different ecosystem, but the principles were the same. "This time of year we'll have cold nights. You packed for that?" "Yes." Not much of a talker. That was fine. Some clients wanted to chat the whole trip, tell you about their job or their divorce or their opinions on politics. I preferred the quiet ones. I picked up his pack again. "Let's get loaded up. I'll need to go over maps with you. Make sure you understand what you're asking for." We hauled his gear up to my truck, a 2010 Ford F-250 with a camper shell and mud flaps that had seen better days. Phillips didn't comment on it, just helped me load everything in the bed and climbed into the passenger seat. I drove us back to my place in Haileybury, a small house I'd been renting for the last 8 years. Nothing fancy. Garage for equipment storage, kitchen table big enough to spread maps on. Phillips waited in the truck while I grabbed my topo maps and brought them inside. We stood at the kitchen table for the better part of an hour. I showed him the access points, the portage routes, the areas where the terrain got rough. He listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. When I pointed out the section Marvin and Madison avoided, Phillips tapped it with one finger. "There," he said. "That's where I need to go." "Why?" "Someone I've been tracking went in 3 weeks ago. Haven't seen him come out. Could have come out a different way. Lot of exit points from that area. I've been watching them all." I looked at him. He said it matter of fact, no drama, just a statement. He'd been watching all the exit points from the Temagami backcountry for 3 weeks. That took resources, took commitment. "This person do something bad?" I asked. "Yes." He didn't elaborate. I didn't push. Wasn't really my business. I was a guide, not a cop. If Phillips was a licensed investigator and this was legal work, that was enough. Had to be enough. Except it wasn't, not quite. I kept looking at the map, at that blank section northeast of Lady Evelyn, where the contour lines got tight and the lakes had names I couldn't pronounce. Dead country. I could hear Marvin's voice, could see the way Madison had shaken her head. But I could also see my daughter Emma's college acceptance letter pinned to the corkboard in my kitchen. University of Toronto. Good school. Expensive school. I'd been setting money aside for years, but it wasn't enough. Student loans would cover some of it, but I wanted to give her a clean start. No debt hanging over her. $9,000 would make a real dent in that first semester. "I'll take you," I said. "But if conditions get dangerous, if weather turns or someone gets hurt, we come back. No arguments." "Agreed. And you follow my lead in the bush. I say we stop, we stop. I say we go around, we go around." "Understood." I folded up the maps. That unease Madison had talked about was sitting in my gut now, solid and cold. I'd felt it before, usually right before something went wrong on a trip. Equipment failure, sudden weather. Once, a client who'd lied about his heart condition and nearly died 2 days in. The feeling was never wrong. But $9,000 and Emma's tuition, and the fact that I'd been doing this for 15 years without a major incident. I knew the bush, knew how to read weather, how to navigate, how to keep clients safe. Dead country was just a superstition. Had to be. "We leave at 5, I said. "Be here at 4:30 and we'll get the canoe loaded." Phillips nodded, shook my hand again, left without another word. I stood in my kitchen after he was gone, looking at the envelope of cash on the table. Picked it up, put it down, picked it up again. The money felt real, heavy, good. The unease felt real too. I left the envelope on the table and went to start packing. The first 3 days went fine. Better than fine, actually. Phillips knew what he was doing out there. We left Haileybury at 5 a.m. sharp on Wednesday. Phillips showed up at 4:30 like we'd agreed, helped me strap the canoe to the truck without being told how, drove 2 hours north to the put-in point I'd scouted on the maps. Lake Temagami was calm that morning, water flat and dark under a grey sky. Phillips loaded the canoe with the kind of efficiency you don't fake. Distributed weight properly without me saying a word. Took the bow seat without discussion. Let me steer from the stern. That's how I knew he'd done this before. Plenty of clients want to sit in back and play captain. The smart ones know the stern paddler does the real work. We made good time that first day. Covered maybe 20 kilometers, portage twice. Phillips carried his own gear, didn't complain, kept a steady pace. Moved through the bush, quiet. Not silent. Nobody's actually silent in the woods, but quiet enough. Didn't snap branches, didn't trip over roots, placed his feet careful. I appreciated that, made my job easier. But his equipment bothered me from the start. First time I noticed was when we stopped for lunch on day 1. Phillips unpacked his rifle case, just checking the seals after the portage. Standard practice. The rifle itself looked normal enough. Remington 700. Popular hunting rifle. Nothing fancy. But the scope mounted on top made me look twice. Thermal scope. High-end one. Probably cost more than my truck. But the lenses had this purple tint I'd never seen before. I've guided hunters with thermal gear plenty of times. The lenses are usually clear, or maybe slightly amber. These were definitely purple. Deep purple, almost violet when the light hit them right. "Custom job?" I asked. Phillips glanced up. "Something like that." He packed the rifle away before I could get a better look. That night, setting up camp on a granite shelf above the waterline, I saw the ammunition. Phillips was organizing his gear, had the cases open. I was building the fire ring, gathering stones, but I could see into his duffel from where I crouched. The rounds were packed in foam, neat rows. Silver tips caught the fading light. Hollow points, looked like. But there was something else in the hollow cavities. White, granular stuff. Packed tight. I walked over. "Those silver-tipped?" "Yeah." "What's the fill? That rock salt?" Phillips closed the case. Not aggressive about it, just deliberate. "Specialized load. Works better for what I need." I almost asked what he needed silver-tipped hollow points filled with salt for. Almost. But I figured I didn't want to know. Wasn't my business what a PI used to track people. Maybe it was some kind of less lethal option. Maybe it was legal in Michigan. Maybe I was better off not asking questions that might make me complicit in something. I went back to building the fire. The real weird part started that evening. After we'd eaten dehydrated stew, bannock I'd made that morning, Phillips stood up and grabbed 2 mason jars from his pack. Wide-mouthed jars, the kind my ex-wife used to use for preserves. These were filled with some kind of thick paste, greyish-brown, consistency of lard. He walked the perimeter of our camp with them. I watched from beside the fire. Phillips moved methodical, clockwise around our site. Every 3 or 4 meters he'd stop, unscrew one of the jars, scoop out a fingerful of the paste, and smear it on a tree trunk or rock, low to the ground, maybe knee-height. Then he'd move to the next spot. The smell hit me when the wind shifted. Sage. Definitely sage. I knew that from smudging ceremonies I'd seen. But also sulfur, sharp and chemical. And under that, something rancid and organic. Rendered fat, maybe. The kind of smell you get from old tallow or bone marrow that's been cooked down. The combination made my nose wrinkle. Phillips completed the circuit and came back to the fire. Screwed the lids back on the jars, wiped his fingers on a rag, packed everything away. I fed another stick to the fire. What's that for? Predators. We don't get many predators this far in, I said. Some wolves, maybe. Black bears this time of year are mostly fattening up, don't bother people much. Better safe. He settled into his sleeping bag, back against a log, and pulled out a small paperback. Some detective novel, looked like. Conversation over. I sat there watching the fire, thinking about that paste. I'd guided in these woods for 15 years, seen plenty of precautions. Bear spray, air horns, electric fences for the real paranoid clients. Had one guy who insisted on sleeping in a portable tree stand every night. But I'd never seen anyone walk a perimeter with homemade repellent that smelled like a folk remedy, and a chemistry experiment had a baby. The silver bullets made a kind of sense if you didn't think too hard. Some specialty ammunition for tracking, fine. The purple thermal scopes were just expensive gear. But the paste bothered me. That was something else. That was the kind of thing people did when they believed in threats you couldn't shoot. I didn't say anything, though. Phillips seemed calm, competent. He'd agreed to follow my lead if things got dangerous, and so far, nothing was dangerous. We were just walking through woods that happened to be quiet. Day 2 was more of the same. We covered good distance. The country was starting to feel different, though. Marvin's voice kept playing in my head. Dead country. I'd been trying not to think about that conversation, but it was getting harder to ignore. The birds were off. Not gone, just off. I'd hear a raven call from maybe 100 meters out, but the sound would be wrong somehow. Timing strange, cadence flat, and there weren't many of them. Normally you'd have chickadees, nuthatches, jays. Here it was just the occasional raven and nothing else. Phillips didn't comment on it, just paddled steady, portaged when we needed to, set up camp that evening on a moss-covered rise. And again, after we ate, he walked the perimeter with those mason jars. Same routine, same smell, same methodical placement every 3 or 4 meters. I watched him smear the paste on a birch tree and wondered what he thought it would keep out. Day 3 we pushed deeper. The terrain was getting rougher, more granite outcrops, fewer beaches, thicker underbrush between the waterways. Good country for someone to disappear in. Bad country for someone to search. I started understanding why Phillips needed a guide. You could walk in circles out here for weeks and never find what you were looking for. That evening, we made camp on a small island, maybe 30 meters across. Just rock and scrub pine, but it had good sight lines and protection from the wind. Phillips did his perimeter walk again. This time I stood up and followed him part way. Not confrontational, just curious. He was crouched by a boulder, smearing the paste into a crack in the rock, when I stopped a few feet away. "That really for bears?" I asked. Phillips didn't look up. "And wolves? Other things? What other things?" He finished with the boulder and stood, screwed the lid back on the jar. In the fading light, his face was hard to read, all shadows and angles. "Predators," he said. "Just predators." I waited to see if he'd say more. He didn't. I nodded. "All right." We walked back to the fire together. Phillips made coffee in a titanium camp pot, offered me some. I accepted. We sat there drinking it, while the sky went from grey to black, and the temperature dropped. I wanted to ask more. Wanted to know what kind of predators required silver bullets and folk magic paste. Wanted to know what Phillips was really tracking out here. But I kept thinking about Emma's acceptance letter. The $9,000, $4,500 of it already sitting in my bank account, deposited the day we left. So I drank my coffee and didn't ask. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Phillips was preparing for something a lot worse than wolves or bears. Something that needed purple scopes and salt-packed rounds and rendered fat mixed with sulfur. Something that made a licensed investigator walk circles around his camp every night, like he was drawing a protective boundary against things that went bump in the dark. I finished my coffee and rinsed the cup. Phillips was already in his sleeping bag, reading his paperback by headlamp. I banked the fire and settled in for the night. Tomorrow we'd go deeper. By day 5, I noticed the quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Wrong quiet. I'd been guiding in northern Ontario for 15 years. You get used to the sounds. Ravens talking to each other across the canopy. Red squirrels chattering when you pass their territory. Chickadees doing their thing in the underbrush. Woodpeckers hammering dead timber. Even when you can't see wildlife, you hear it. The bush is always making noise if you know how to listen. This wasn't that. This was nothing. I first noticed it during our morning paddle on day 5. We'd broken camp around 6, eaten cold bannock and instant coffee, loaded the canoe. Phillips took his usual spot in the bow. I steered from the stern. We were maybe 2 hours into the day when I realized I hadn't heard a single bird call since we'd started moving. I stopped paddling, let the canoe drift. Phillips glanced back. Didn't say anything, just waited. I listened. Wind in the pines, water against the hull. That was it. "You hear that?" I said. "Hear what?" "Exactly." Phillips turned forward again, started paddling. I figured he didn't care or didn't understand, so I let it go and kept us moving. But it bugged me, a little at first. More as the day went on. We portaged around a set of rapids mid-morning. I carried the canoe. Phillips hauled the packs and his gear. The trail was about 400 meters through mixed forest. Birch, spruce, some jack pine. Good cover. Exactly the kind of place you'd normally flush grouse or startle a hare. Nothing moved. I set the canoe down at the far end and walked back to help Phillips with the second load. He was crouched by the trail checking something on the ground. I got closer and saw what he was looking at. Game trail. Deer, probably. Crossed our portage path at an angle and disappeared into the bush on both sides. No tracks. The soil was soft enough. We'd gotten rain 3 days before we put in, and the ground here still held moisture. Should have been prints everywhere. Deer, moose, maybe wolf if we were lucky. But the trail was just compressed earth and bent grass. Old sign. Nothing fresh. "When's the last time you saw scat?" Phillips said. I thought about it. Couldn't remember. "Couple days," I said. Wasn't sure if that was true. Phillips stood, adjusted his pack. "Nothing fresh, though." "No." He kept walking. I grabbed the duffel and followed. We made camp that evening on a rocky point with a decent clearing. I built the fire ring while Phillips unpacked. The routine was familiar by now. He'd organize his gear, check his rifle, then walk the perimeter with those mason jars while I got the fire going and prepped food. I was stacking kindling when I decided to actually pay attention to the area around us. Not just tactically, good drainage, windbreak, sight lines, but really look at what was there. No droppings, No scat piles. No gnawed bark where porcupines had been working. No overturned rocks where something had been looking for grubs. I walked to the edge of our clearing, where it met the tree line, checked the ground, leaf litter, pine needles, moss, undisturbed. "It's empty," I said. Phillips was 20 feet away, fitting stones into the fire ring I'd started. He didn't look up. "Yeah, you noticed. Day 3. That annoyed me a little. He'd known for 2 days and hadn't mentioned it. But I guess I'd noticed too, and hadn't said anything until now. So maybe we were even." "Ever seen country this dead?" I said. "Once." He didn't elaborate. I waited, but he just kept working on the fire ring, so I let it drop. We ate. Dehydrated chili that tasted like cardboard and salt. Phillips did his perimeter walk with the jars. I banked the fire and was getting ready to turn in when he came back and sat down across from me. "Tomorrow we'll start seeing sign," he said. "What kind of sign?" "The kind that shows something's been through." He pulled out his paperback. Conversation over. I didn't sleep great that night. Kept waking up to check the perimeter. The paste smell was there, sage and sulfur and that rancid fat note, but nothing else. No animal sounds, no movement in the bush. Just wind and water and silence. Day 5 continued like that. Quiet paddle, quiet portage, quiet everything. We were making good distance, though. Phillips had shown me on the map that morning where he wanted to go. Another 15 kilometers northeast into a section where the lakes got smaller and the land got rougher. I knew the area from maps, but I'd never guided there. Nobody did. Mid-afternoon, we stopped to rest and refill water bottles. There was a decent beach, gravel and sand, good access to the lake. I pulled the canoe up, and Phillips got out to stretch. That's when I saw the birch tree. It was maybe 30 feet from the waterline. Good-sized tree, probably 80 years old, white bark with the usual black scarring, but there was something wrong with it about 12 feet up. I walked closer. The bark was gouged, deep cuts running vertical, 4 parallel lines. Each gouge was maybe 8 inches long and wide enough that I could see the pale wood underneath. Phillips. He was already walking over. Must have seen it too. I stood at the base of the tree looking up. The marks were way too high. Black bears will mark trees, sure. They'll stand on their hind legs and claw or bite to leave scent. But the biggest black bear I'd ever seen might reach 8 feet, maybe 9 if it really stretched. These marks started at 12 feet. "Could be an old mark," I said. "Tree grew and pushed it higher." Phillips didn't answer. He'd pulled out his phone and was taking pictures. Then he set his pack down, unzipped a side pocket, and pulled out a small leather journal, worn brown cover, held together with an elastic band. He flipped it open, started comparing whatever was inside to the marks on the tree. I stepped closer, got a look at the pages. The journal was packed with notes, tight handwriting in black ink, dates down the left margin, coordinates next to them, and sketches. I saw one clearly before Phillips angled the journal away. A figure, humanoid but wrong, too tall, limbs too long and too thin. The joints were in the right places, shoulders, elbows, knees, but the proportions were off. The sketch showed it crouched, and even crouched it looked huge. The head was small, no details on the face, just an oval shape. My stomach did something unpleasant. Phillips snapped 2 more photos, then tucked the journal back in his breast pocket. He walked around the tree, checked the ground, ran his fingers along the gouges. "Fresh," he said. "How fresh? Week, maybe less." I looked at the marks again. 4 parallel lines, evenly spaced. The wood inside the cuts was still pale, not weathered grey. "What made that?" I said. Phillips didn't answer right away. He was staring up at the marks with an expression I couldn't read. Focused, maybe satisfied. "What I'm tracking," he said finally, "that's not a person." "No," he said it flat, No elaboration. I waited. He pulled his pack back on and started walking toward the canoe. Phillips. He stopped, turned halfway. What the hell are we hunting? I'm hunting, he said. You're guiding. I saw your journal. Then you saw enough. Those drawings are field notes, Phillips said. I've been tracking this thing for 6 months. It killed 3 people in Michigan, crossed the border near Sault Ste. Marie in August. I followed it here. My hands felt cold. You said you were tracking someone. I said I was tracking someone who did something bad and doesn't want to be found. Phillips adjusted his pack straps. That's accurate. That's not a someone. Depends on your definition. I just stared at him. Phillips sighed, looked tired for the first time since I'd met him. You want to abort? We abort. That was the deal. But I need to know now, because if we turn back, it'll move again and I'll lose the trail. I thought about the $9,000, thought about Emma's tuition, thought about those marks 12 feet up a birch tree and the sketches in Phillips's journal. What is it? I said. Predator. Be specific. I don't have a name for it, Phillips said. Neither does anyone else. It's not in any wildlife database. It's not a known species. But it's real. It's out here, and it knows we're coming. How do you know it knows? Phillips looked past me toward the tree line. Because it's watching us right now. I turned, scanned the forest, saw nothing but spruce and shadow. I don't see anything. You won't, Phillips said, not unless it wants you to. He walked to the canoe and started loading his pack. I stood there on the beach looking at the gouged birch tree and the empty forest beyond it. Everything was still quiet. No birds, no animals, just us and whatever made those marks. I picked up my pack and followed Phillips to the canoe. Day 7. We found the moose. I saw it from the water first. Something dark against the pale granite shoreline, too big to be a log, wrong shape for a boulder. I stopped paddling, and the canoe drifted. Phillips turned his head maybe 15 degrees to the left without raising his paddle. Sure, I said. 11 o'clock. Phillips looked, didn't say anything. Just shifted his weight forward and started paddling again, harder this time. We came in at an angle so I could beach the canoe without scraping the hull on rock. The moose was maybe 30 feet from the waterline. Bull. Massive rack, probably 60 inches across, maybe more. I've guided hunters who would have paid $15,000 for a trophy like that. The antlers were intact. Everything else was bone. I mean everything. Clean white bones scattered across maybe a 20-foot radius, ribs splayed out like fingers, vertebrae in a rough line that didn't connect anymore. The skull was there with the rack still attached. Pelvis over to the left. Both femurs. I counted 3 of the 4 lower leg bones before I stopped counting. Not a scrap of hide, not a tendon, nothing. I pulled the canoe up and stepped onto the rocks. Phillips was already out, already walking toward the remains. I followed. The smell hit me about 10 feet away. Not rot exactly. It was too clean for that, too empty. But there was something underneath, something chemical and wrong that I couldn't place. I breathed through my mouth and kept walking. 800 pounds, I said. Probably more. The skull alone was huge, eye sockets the size of my fist. Maybe 9. Phillips crouched beside the ribcage. He didn't touch anything, just looked. I circled the site slowly, checking the ground, the tree line, the bones themselves. The forest was quiet. Same silence we'd been paddling through for 3 days. No ravens, no jays, nothing coming in to scavenge what was left, which was nothing anyway. How long? Phillips said. Not a question. He was still crouched, still looking at the ribs. I stopped beside the skull. Hard to say. Bones are clean, but they're not weathered. No lichens, no moss. I crouched and looked closer at the left eye socket. No insect activity I can see. No larvae, no beetles. Estimate. Day, maybe 2. I stood and walked the perimeter again, looking for scat, for prints, for anything that would tell me what did this. Something this size, normal predators would take days to strip. Wolves would scatter the bones more. Bears leave tears in the hide, crush bones for marrow. This is... I didn't finish. Phillips stood and walked to the spine, pulling out his phone. He took photos from multiple angles, crouched again, took close-ups of individual vertebrae. "This is what?" he said. "I don't know." He looked at me. Then he went back to the bones. I found the teeth marks on the femur, right femur, about mid-shaft. I crouched and tilted my head to catch the light. Grooves, maybe a dozen of them, parallel and deep. I ran my finger along one without thinking, then pulled my hand back. "Phillips." He came over. I pointed. He took 4 photos, then crouched beside me and just looked for maybe 30 seconds. "Bite radius," I said. "It's wrong." "How?" "Too wide. Way too wide. Wolf jaw is maybe 4, 5 inches. Grizzly might hit 7. These marks are 8 inches apart, maybe 9. I leaned closer. "And the pattern's wrong. Predators tear. They rip. These look like something gnawed, scraped the bone clean instead of breaking it down." Phillips pulled out the brown leather journal from his breast pocket. He flipped to a middle page, looked at whatever was there, looked back at the femur. Didn't show me. "Matches," he said. "Matches what?" He didn't answer. Just took 3 more photos and moved to the next bone. The pelvis. I stayed with the femur. I've seen wolf kills, bear kills, even a wolverine kill once up near James Bay. I've seen what happens when a moose gets hit by a truck and the scavengers come in. I've seen winter starvation, disease, old age. 15 years of guiding, you see how things die. This wasn't any of that. I stood and looked at the tree line again. Still nothing. No movement, no sound. The paste smell from Phillips's perimeter walk last night was faint but still there. Sage and sulfur, and that rancid fat smell I couldn't get used to. Phillips was at the skull now. He'd set his phone down on a flat rock and had the journal open beside it, comparing something. He pulled a small metal tape measure from his pocket, the kind contractors use, yellow and black, and measured the distance between the antler bases. Wrote something in the journal. Measured the skull length from eye socket to nasal cavity. Wrote again. I walked the perimeter one more time. The ground was mostly granite with patches of moss and lichen in the cracks. No tracks. No blood trail leading in or out. No drag marks. It was like the moose had just appeared here and been stripped where it stood. "Phillips," I said, "where's the blood?" He looked up from the journal. "What?" "Moose this size. Something kills it. There should be blood. Lots of it. I'm not seeing any." He stood and scanned the area, walked to the tree line, crouched, examined the moss. Came back. "Eaten," he said. "What?" "Blood. Organs. Everything soft. It ate everything." I stared at him. "Nothing eats everything. Scavengers leave something. Always. Stomach contents, intestines, something. This one doesn't." He went back to the skull. I stood there, looking at clean white bones scattered on granite, and thought about that sketch in his journal. The thing with wrong proportions. Too tall, limbs too long. Phillips worked for an hour, maybe more. I lost track. He photographed every bone from multiple angles, measured bite marks on 7 different pieces, filled 4 journal pages with notes and sketches I couldn't see from where I stood. He moved methodically, precisely, like a crime scene tech. Which I guess he was. Sort of. I sat on a rock near the canoe and watched. Checked my watch twice. Drank some water. Looked at the tree line until my eyes hurt. The sun moved. Phillips kept working. Finally he stood, brushed off his knees, and packed the journal and tape measure away. He took one last photo of the whole site, wide angle, then walked back to the canoe. "We're close," he said. I didn't ask how he knew. I stood and helped him push off. That night we made camp on a granite shelf about 8 kilometers northeast of the moose site. Good elevation, good sight lines, wind from the west. Phillips did his perimeter walk with the mason jars. I built the fire and got water boiling for the dehydrated beef stew I'd packed. We ate without talking. The sun went down. Temperature dropped. I added wood to the fire, and Phillips made coffee in the titanium pot. He poured 2 cups and handed me one. We sat across from each other with the fire between us. I could smell the paste from the perimeter, stronger than usual. Maybe he'd used more. Maybe the wind was just wrong. 3 years, Phillips said. I looked at him over the cup. I've been tracking this thing for 3 years. Started in the Yukon, followed it through northern BC, across Alberta, into Saskatchewan. It went north for a while, up near the territories, then cut east through Manitoba and Ontario. Last confirmed sighting was in Quebec, near Chibougamau, about 4 months ago. I drank coffee, waited. It moves, Phillips said. Never stays in one place more than a few weeks. Never hunts the same area twice. It's smart, careful, knows how to avoid people when it wants to. And when it doesn't want to, I said. Yeah. He drank his coffee. Firelight made his face hard to read, all shadows and angles. Missing hikers, he said. That's how it started. Yukon first, 2 hikers, experienced, well-equipped. Vanished on a 4-day trip near Kluane. Search and rescue found their tent, their gear, everything. No sign of them. No blood, no tracks, nothing. He paused. Then 3 weeks later, a trapper outside Whitehorse. Same thing. Gone. Gear left behind. Could be anything, I said. People get lost. That's what the report said, but there were 6 more over the next year. British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan. Different jurisdictions, different police forces. Nobody connected them. You did. I did. He set his cup down and stared into the fire. Police reports got buried. Not officially. Just filed away. Marked as missing persons. Presumed lost in wilderness. Case suspended pending new evidence. Nobody wanted to write what the witnesses were saying. Which was what? That something was in the woods. Something that moved wrong, sounded wrong. Something that screamed at night. I thought about the silence we'd been paddling through. The absence of birds, of animals, of anything alive. I drank more coffee. Communities up there, Phillips said. Small towns, native reserves, trapping camps. They know. They've seen it, or they've seen what it leaves behind. But they won't talk. Not to outsiders, not to police. They just move, pack up and go somewhere else until it passes through. You talk to them. Some, enough. He picked up his cup again, looked at the contents. Enough to know it's real, enough to know what it does. The fire popped. Sparks drifted up into darkness. It was a man, Phillips said. Once, 3 years ago, trapper named Easton Wilson worked the territory east of Watson Lake with a partner, another trapper named Dylan Nguyen. Winter of that year was bad, brutal, coldest in decades. They ran their lines, but the game was gone, moved south or died off. By February they were starving. He stopped. I waited. Nguyen died first, Phillips said. Exposure, malnutrition, probably both. Wilson was alone. No food, no way out. Snowbound until spring thaw. I knew where this was going. I didn't want to hear it, but I knew. He ate him, Phillips said. Ate his partner. Survived the winter that way. When the thaw came, he walked out. Or something did. Something. Yeah. Phillips looked at me. Because whatever walked out of those woods wasn't Easton Wilson anymore. I set my cup down. My hands were steady, but I could feel my pulse in my throat. What is it? I said. I don't know. Nobody does. It's not in any database, any wildlife records. It's not a known species, but it's real and it's out here, and it knows we're coming. How do you know that? Because it's been leaving signs since day 4. The birch tree, the moose, probably other things we haven't found. It knows. I looked past him toward the dark tree line. Couldn't see anything. Just black, and the faint shapes of spruce against slightly less black sky. Easton Wilson, I said. That's the name he had. I don't know if he remembers it. I don't know if there's anything left in there that remembers being human. Philip stood and walked to his pack. He pulled out the paperback, came back, sat down. We'll find it tomorrow, he said, or it'll find us. He opened the book. Conversation over. I sat there looking at the fire, thinking about a man who ate his partner and became something else, thinking about teeth marks that didn't match any predator I knew, thinking about $9,000 and Emma's tuition and what the hell I was doing out here. I didn't sleep much that night. Day 9. We found the cabin just after noon. I wasn't expecting it. The clearing came out of nowhere. 1 minute we were pushing through thick spruce and deadfall. The next, we stepped into open space, maybe 40 feet across. The cabin sat in the middle, half collapsed on its foundation, with the roof caved in on the left side. Logs were weathered gray, some rotted through at the bottom. One window was busted out completely, just jagged glass teeth around the frame. The other window still had glass, but it was so filthy I couldn't see through it. Philip stopped at the tree line. I came up beside him, breathing hard from the bushwhack. We'd been hiking since dawn, no water route this time, just straight overland through rough country. Phillips had been navigating by compass and that thermal scope, stopping every half hour to glass the terrain ahead. "This it?" I asked. Phillips nodded once. He pulled out his phone, checked something, put it away. "GPS puts us right on top of the coordinates." I looked at the cabin again. I'd guided this region, well, near this region, for years. I'd studied maps, marked routes, noted every structure and clearing within 50 kilometers of anywhere I might take clients. I'd never seen this place, never even heard of it. "Whose cabin?" I asked. "Easton Wilson's." Phillips unslung his rifle, checked the chamber. He and another trapper named Dylan Nguyen ran a line out here. That was 4 years ago. The smell hit me then. Wind shifted, came across the clearing straight at us. I gagged, turned my head, breathed through my mouth. It was decay, but not the clean smell of something dead in the woods. This was rot, mixed with something else. Something chemical and sweet and wrong. Phillips didn't react to the smell. He stepped into the clearing, rifle at low ready, moving toward the cabin door. I followed because that's what I'd been doing for 9 days now. Following, not asking enough questions, not turning back when I should have. The door hung open on one hinge. Phillips stopped 3 feet from it, angled to the side, looking in without entering. I came up on his other side, looked past him into the interior. It was dim inside. The intact half of the roof blocked most of the light. I could see a table, 2 chairs, one upright, one on its side, a metal bed frame against the far wall with no mattress, and shelves made from split logs. Everything was covered in dust and something darker. Bird shit, maybe, or mold. Philip stepped through the doorway. I waited 5 seconds, then followed. The smell was worse inside. Way worse. I pulled my shirt up over my nose and mouth, breathed through the fabric. It didn't help much. Phillips moved to the right, checking the corner near the collapsed section. I stayed near the door, eyes adjusting to the dimness. That's when I saw them. The bones were stacked in the back left corner, just piled there like firewood. Neat, almost. Deliberate. I didn't move. Couldn't for a second. My brain was trying to make sense of what I was seeing, trying to categorize it as something normal. Deer bones. Moose bones from a winter kill. Anything but what they actually were. But I'd seen enough bones in 15 years of guiding. I knew the difference. These were human, Femurs, tibius, ribs, a pelvis, 2 skulls sitting on top of the pile, eye sockets facing out into the room. The bones were gnawed. I could see the marks from where I stood. Deep grooves, the same pattern we'd seen on the moose femur. Some of the bones still had tissue on them, dried scraps of muscle, dark and leathery. One of the skulls had hair still attached to the scalp, long and dark, hanging down like moss. I felt bile rise in my throat, swallowed it back down, tasted acid. "Jesus Christ," I said. My voice came out thin. Phillips walked over to the corner, crouched beside the pile. He pulled out his phone, started taking photos. Methodical, same as the moose site. Like this was just more evidence to document. I turned away, looked at the rest of the cabin, tried to breathe. The table had papers on it, scattered like someone had been reading, and just stood up and left. A tin cup sat on the edge, tipped over. The shelves held a few rusted cans, no labels, and a box of shotgun shells spilled across one plank. And a book, small, leather-bound, sitting in the center of the table like someone had placed it there deliberately. I walked over, didn't touch it at first, just looked. It was a diary. The cover was water-stained, edges curled. No title or name on the front. I glanced back at Phillips. He was still photographing the bones, measuring something with his tape measure. I opened the diary. The first page had a name written in careful block letters, Easton Wilson. Below that, a date, October 12th. 4 years ago. The handwriting in the first entries was neat, controlled. Wilson wrote about setting traps, checking lines, weather conditions, normal trapper stuff. He mentioned Dylan a few times. Dylan caught a fox. Dylan thinks we should move the line east. Dylan made stew. I flipped forward. The handwriting got messier. The entries got shorter. November 4th. No game. Nothing on the lines. Dylan says we should head out, but snow's too deep now. We'll wait. November 19th. Ate the last of the flour. Dylan's coughing bad. Still no game. Not even tracks. Nothing moves here. I flipped again. My hands were shaking a little. December 2nd. Dylan died last night. Exposure, I think. Coughing stopped around midnight. Buried him out back, but ground's too frozen. Did what I could. My stomach clenched. I kept reading. December 4th. So hungry. Can't think straight. Dylan's out back. I keep thinking about the entry stopped mid-sentence. The next page had a single line. December 7th. God forgive me. I didn't want to turn the page. Did it anyway. The handwriting changed. Got wild. Slanted hard to the right. Some words illegible. Wilson wrote about taste, about texture, about how he'd thought it would make him sick, but it didn't. About how the hunger went away for 2 days and then came back worse. About going back to the shallow grave out back. I felt sweat on my forehead despite the cold. Flipped forward faster now, skimming. Wilson wrote about the hunger changing, about it never going away anymore, even after he ate, about his hands looking wrong, his reflection in the tin cup looking stretched, about hearing things in the woods at night, and then realizing the sounds were coming from his own throat. The entries got shorter, more confused. He wrote about Dylan visiting him, standing in the corner at night, but Dylan was dead. He knew Dylan was dead because he'd eaten most of him. The last few pages with actual words were barely legible. Wilson wrote about pain, about his bones stretching, about his teeth falling out and new ones growing in, about not being able to stand upright anymore because the ceiling was too low, about the hunger being everything, being all he was. Then the words stopped. The final pages were just symbols, scratched into the paper so hard the pen had torn through in places. Circles and lines over and over. No pattern I could see, just frantic marking. And on the very last page, one phrase, written over and over and over, filling every line, the handwriting getting bigger and wilder until the final repetitions were huge, taking up 3 lines each. So hungry, so hungry, so hungry, so hungry, so hungry. I closed the diary, set it back on the table. My hands were shaking for real now. You done? Phillips was standing, phone away, looking at me. I nodded. Couldn't speak yet. Read it? Yeah. Phillips walked over, picked up the diary, flipped through it quickly like he was confirming something he already knew. He stopped at the last page, looked at it for a few seconds, then closed it and put it in his pack. Dylan Nguyen died of exposure, Phillips said. Wilson ate him, then Wilson became what I've been tracking. I looked at the bone pile in the corner. Those aren't all from one person. No, Wilson's been hunting for 4 years. I've documented 11 missing persons in northern Ontario that fit the pattern. Hikers, hunters, a couple of fishermen. These are probably 2 of them. Phillips walked toward the door. We should go. He knows we're here. I didn't move. Something was clicking into place in my head. The conversation 6 months ago at the outfitters' meet. Marvin saying dead country, poor game. Madison talking about how nothing moves right. They knew, not the details maybe, but they knew something was wrong out here. Something that made the wildlife disappear, made the birds go quiet, turned this whole section of wilderness into empty space. Not poor game country, a hunting ground, and I'd walked straight into it. Brought a client right to the center of it because I needed $9,000 and didn't ask enough questions. Garcia. Phillips was at the door, looking back at me. We need to move. I looked at the bone pile one more time, at the diary sitting in Phillips's pack, at the collapsed roof and the filthy windows, and the smell of rot that was so thick I could taste it. Yeah, I said, okay. I followed Phillips out of the cabin into the clearing. The fresh air hit my lungs, and I bent over, hands on my knees, breathing hard, trying not to throw up. Phillips scanned the tree line with his scope, rifle up, moving in a slow circle. I straightened up, looked at the cabin, at the woods surrounding us. Somewhere out there, Easton Wilson was still hunting, and we were next. We made camp maybe 6 kilometers from the cabin. Phillips picked the spot, a low ridge with rock on 3 sides and open ground sloping down toward a marsh. Good sight lines. That's what he said. Good sight lines meant we could see it coming. I built the fire while Phillips did his perimeter walk. He used both jars that night. I watched him smear that paste on every tree and rock he could reach, doubling back to add more in some places. The smell was thick, sage and sulfur, and that rancid fat smell that made my throat close up a little. When he finished, he came back to the fire and didn't sit down. Just stood there with the rifle in his hands, scope up, scanning the tree line. I heated water for coffee. My hands shook enough that I spilled some on the rocks and it hissed. Phillips didn't drink his cup. He set it down on a flat stone and kept scanning. The sun dropped. Temperature went with it. I put on my second flannel and zipped my jacket over that. Phillips hadn't spoken since we left the cabin. I hadn't either. What was there to say? I kept seeing that diary, those last pages. So hungry. The bone pile in the corner. 2 skulls, one with hair still attached. Easton Wilson had eaten his partner. Then he'd become something else. And he'd been out here 4 years. Hunting. I drank my coffee. It tasted like nothing. Full dark came on fast. Phillips added wood to the fire without me asking. The flames went up and the light pushed back the shadows, maybe 15 feet. Past that was just black. No moon. Overcast sky. The kind of dark where you can't see your hand if you hold it out far enough. I heard nothing. No wind, no birds, no insects. Nothing. Phillips stood on the north side of the fire, rifle ready, scanning left to right in a slow pattern. I sat on my pack facing east. My own rifle was across my knees. I'm not sure when I'd picked it up. My hands just did it. We stayed like that for maybe an hour. Phillips scanning, me watching the tree line where the firelight ended, the paste smell everywhere. Then Phillips stopped moving. He went completely still. Rifle scope to his eye, aimed at 2 o'clock from where I sat. I followed his sight line, saw nothing but black and the shapes of spruce trunks at the edge of the light. "There," Phillips said. Quiet. Flat. I looked harder. Didn't see anything. Phillips's finger moved to the trigger guard. That's when I saw it. It stood at the tree line maybe 40 feet out, right at the edge where firelight turned to shadow. I don't know how I missed it before. It was too tall to miss. 8 feet, maybe 9. Skeletal. That's the word that came to me. Skeletal. Its limbs were wrong, too long, too thin, joints in the right places, but proportions all stretched out. Arms that hung down past where knees should be. Legs that bent backward just slightly at the knees, like a dog's back legs. The torso was elongated, ribs visible under skin that looked grey in the firelight, stretched tight over bones. The head was small, oval, almost normal-sized, but the neck was too long, and the way it sat on those shoulders was wrong. It didn't move. I couldn't breathe. My chest locked up completely. The thing stood there at the tree line, and it watched us. Then it tilted its head. Slow. Curious. The movement was smooth and deliberate, and that made it worse somehow. An animal would have jerked or twitched. This thing moved like it was thinking, deciding. The firelight caught its eyes. They reflected. Flat yellow shine, like a deer's eyes in headlights, or a wolf's eyes in a flashlight beam. Tapetum lucidum. That's the term. The reflective layer behind the retina that nocturnal animals have. But there was something behind that shine. Something looking back. Intelligence. Not animal intelligence, not human either. Something else. Something that understood what we were, and what it was doing, and what was going to happen. I realized it had been watching us for days. Since the birch tree with the claw marks, maybe. Or earlier, since we entered this section of bush. It had been tracking us the whole time, while we thought we were tracking it. Hunting us. Deciding when to close the distance. My rifle was in my hands, but I couldn't lift it. Couldn't move. Phillips fired. The sound cracked across the clearing, and my ears rang. The muzzle flash lit everything up white for a split second. I saw the thing fully in that flash. Every detail. The ribs, the 2 long fingers, the joints. Phillips fired again. The second round hit. I saw the impact, saw the thing jerk backward, saw dark spray that might have been blood. Then it screamed. I'll never forget that sound. Never. It wasn't animal, and it wasn't human. It was both and neither. A high, shrieking wail that went on, rising and falling, and underneath it was something that sounded like words. Not words I knew, not any language, but the shape of words. The thing was trying to speak while it screamed. The sound cut off, then it charged. It moved fast, faster than anything that size should move, loping across the clearing on those backward bent legs, arms swinging, head forward. Phillips fired again, missed, fired, hit it in the shoulder maybe. It spun sideways, but didn't stop. I ran, didn't think, didn't decide. My body just moved. I dropped my rifle and ran straight back from the fire into the trees behind our camp. Behind me, Phillips's rifle kept firing. Crack, crack, crack. The thermal scope didn't need light. He could see it. He kept shooting. I hit the tree line and branches whipped my face. I couldn't see anything. Full dark. I put my hands up and crashed through deadfall and underbrush, tripping on roots, slamming into trunks. The thing screamed again. Closer, behind me and to the left. I ran harder. My lungs burned. My legs were already shaking from the long hike that day, but I didn't stop. Phillips's rifle fired 3 more times. Fast, controlled pairs, and then a single. Then silence. I kept running. I don't know for how long. Hours maybe. I had no light, no compass, no gear, just the clothes I was wearing and my boots and my knife on my belt that I didn't even remember I had. I ran until I couldn't anymore. Then I walked, stumbled, fell twice and got back up, kept moving. The forest was completely black. I navigated by feel, hands out, touching trees, stepping carefully, listening. I heard nothing behind me, no footsteps, no breathing, no screaming. I didn't know if that was good or bad. Phillips's rifle had stopped. That meant he was out of ammunition, or he was dead, or the thing was dead. I didn't let myself think about which one. I kept moving, picked a direction that felt downhill and followed it. Water runs downhill. Roads follow water sometimes. Logging roads. My mouth was dry. I had no water, no pack. At some point I started talking to myself, just muttering, counting steps, saying, "Keep going," over and over. The night went on forever. Then the sky started getting lighter, not bright, just less black. Grey. I could see shapes, trees, my own hands. Dawn. I was still alive. I kept walking. My legs were numb. My feet hurt. I'd turned my ankle at some point, and it was swollen inside my boot. The trees thinned out. I saw a clear-cut section ahead, stumps and brush, and past that, a road, logging road, gravel and dirt, 2 ruts with grass in the middle. I stumbled out onto it and stopped. Looked both ways. No idea which direction to go. I picked right. Started walking. The sun came up behind the clouds. Everything was grey and cold, and my breath made fog. I walked for maybe 20 minutes, maybe an hour. Time didn't mean anything. Then I heard an engine. I turned, saw a truck coming from behind me. Big Ford F-350, faded red, logging company decal on the door. I stepped into the middle of the road and waved both arms. The truck slowed, stopped about 10 feet from me. The driver's door opened and a guy got out. Older, 50s maybe, heavy build, trucker cap. He looked at me and his face went worried. "Jesus," he said. "You okay?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. He came closer. "You hurt? You need help?" I managed to nod. "All right," he said. "All right, come on. I'll get you to a hospital." He took my arm and guided me to the passenger side. Opened the door, helped me up into the seat. I sat there shaking. He went around and got in the driver's side, started the engine, turned the heat up. "I'm Norman," he said. "Norman Reese. What's your name?" "Zachary," I said. My voice sounded wrong, hoarse. "Zachary Garcia." "Okay, Zachary. I'm going to take you to Timmins. Hospital there. That all right?" I nodded. He put the truck in gear and we started moving. I looked out the window at the trees going past. Didn't see anything moving in them. Didn't see it. Norman didn't ask questions, just drove. Kept the heat on. Handed me a bottle of water from the cup holder. I drank the whole thing. We drove for maybe 40 minutes. I didn't talk. Norman glanced at me a few times, but didn't push. When the hospital came into view, I finally let myself breathe. Norman pulled up to the emergency entrance and put the truck in park. "You gonna be okay?" he asked. I looked at him. Didn't know how to answer that. He reached across and opened my door. "Go on, get yourself checked out." I climbed down from the truck. My legs almost gave out, but I caught myself on the door. Norman waited until I was steady. Then he nodded once and I shut the door. He drove off. I turned and walked toward the emergency room doors. The frostbite took 3 toes, left foot, the middle 3. The doctor at the Temiskaming hospital said I was lucky it wasn't the whole foot, which I guess was supposed to make me feel better. It didn't. He explained the procedure in detail I didn't ask for, how the tissue had died, how amputation was necessary to prevent infection, how I'd adapt to the new balance over time. I nodded and signed the forms. Norman Reese, the truck driver who'd found me on that logging road, had already driven 4 hours out of his way to get me there. He waited in the lobby while they prepped me for surgery, reading a hunting magazine, drinking coffee from the vending machine. I never saw him again after that day, but I think about him sometimes. Good guy. Didn't ask questions I couldn't answer. Sergeant Grace Lucas showed up 2 days later, while I was still in the hospital bed, foot wrapped in bandages that smelled like antiseptic, and something else underneath. She was maybe mid-40s, short dark hair, brown eyes that didn't miss much, OPP uniform pressed and clean. She pulled up the visitor's chair, took out a notebook, clicked her pen, asked if I was up for talking. I said yes. She asked me to start from the beginning, so I did. I told her about Frankie Phillips, the float plane, the $9,000, the northeast Temagami route that other guides wouldn't touch. I described the silence in the bush, the stripped moose carcass, the cabin with the bone pile and Easton Wilson's diary. I told her about the creature at the tree line, 8 or 9 feet tall, wrong proportions, yellow eyes that reflected the firelight. I described Phillips shooting it, the scream that sounded like it was trying to form words, the charge, running into the darkness, walking until dawn, the logging road. Grace wrote everything down, didn't interrupt. When I finished, she asked specific questions. What time did we make camp that last night? What direction did I run? How long did I walk before finding the road? Could I describe the cabin's location on a map? I answered what I could. A lot of it I didn't know. I'd run blind in full darkness with no compass, no reference points, just panic and the need to put distance between me and that thing. She organized a search party, left the hospital and came back the next day with maps, asked me to mark our route as best I could remember. I traced the lakes and portages we'd taken, marked approximately where I thought the cabin was, gave her the coordinates Phillips had shown me on his phone, the ones I'd memorized without meaning to. She nodded, made notes, told me the search teams would head out as soon as weather cleared. They searched for 6 days. Grace came back to the hospital. I'd been moved to a recovery room by then, learning to walk with the crutches and the new weight distribution, and told me they'd found nothing. No campsite, no cabin, no remains, no Frankie Phillips, no evidence anyone had been in that section of bush recently except wildlife. She said it carefully, watching my face. I asked about the coordinates. She said they'd checked those exact GPS points and found only forest, no structures, no cleared ground, no indication a cabin had ever existed there. I told her that was impossible. I'd been inside it. I'd held Easton Wilson's diary in my hands, read his entries about eating Dylan Nguyen, about changing into something else. I'd seen the bone pile, 2 skulls, one with hair still attached. Grace's expression didn't change much. Professional. She asked if I still had the diary. I said no. Phillips had packed it. She asked if I'd taken photos. I said no. She asked if there was any physical evidence I could provide, anything I'd brought back from the cabin or the route. I had nothing. No pack, no gear, no phone. Just the clothes I'd been wearing, my boots, and the knife on my belt that I'd somehow kept through the whole night. Everything else was still out there, or gone, or never existed, according to the search teams. She closed her notebook, told me they'd keep the case open, follow up on Frankie Phillips through official channels, check his PI license, contact Michigan authorities, verify he was a real person who'd hired me. She said it gently, which somehow made it worse, like she was already deciding what she believed. 2 weeks later, she called my room, said they'd confirmed a Francis Phillips held a valid private investigator license in Michigan and Ontario, had an address in Grand Rapids, no criminal record, no outstanding warrants. But the address was abandoned. He'd cleared out months ago, no forwarding information, no family contacts on file, no business partner. The float plane pilot, Danny Keogh, confirmed he'd flown someone matching Phillips's description to Kirkland Lake on the date I specified, but didn't know anything beyond that. 1 flight, cash payment, standard job. So Phillips was real. Everything else was question marks. I was discharged 3 days after that call. They gave me a walking boot, prescriptions for pain and infection, an appointment card for follow-up in 6 weeks. I took a cab back to my rental in Haileybury. The house felt wrong when I walked in. Too quiet, too normal. The kitchen table where Phillips and I had reviewed maps looked the same. Emma's acceptance letter still pinned to the corkboard. The envelope with $4,500 was gone. I'd deposited it before we left, used some for gear and supplies. The other $4,500 was supposed to come after we returned. I didn't guide for the rest of that season. Told clients I was injured, which was true. Referred them to other outfitters. Marvin Stevenson called once to check on me. I didn't tell him much. Just said a trip went bad. I got turned around, spent a night in the bush and paid for it. He didn't push. But I told the story to other people. Friends, other guides at the bar in North Bay, a reporter from the Temiskaming Speaker who'd heard about the search and wanted details. I kept thinking if I said it enough times, someone would recognize something. Someone would say they'd seen the cabin, or heard about Easton Wilson, or encountered something in that dead country that matched what I'd witnessed. No one did. Most people listened politely and changed the subject. A couple suggested maybe I'd gotten hypothermic, gotten confused, mixed up what I'd seen with what I'd imagined. One guy asked if I'd been drinking. I hadn't touched alcohol on the trip, never did while guiding, but he asked anyway. The questions bothered me more than the doubt, like if they could explain it away with cold or dehydration or panic, they wouldn't have to consider the alternative. Then I talked to Dr. Peyton Johnson. Grace had suggested it, not ordered, just suggested. Said it might help to talk to someone professional about the trauma, the lost time, the confusion. She gave me his card. Psychiatrist based in Sudbury, took OPP referrals, specialized in traumatic stress. I called him because I didn't know what else to do. Made an appointment for the following Thursday. His office was in a medical building off Regent Street, 3rd floor. Pale blue walls and landscape paintings that were probably supposed to be calming. He was late 50s maybe. Silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, button-down shirt and khakis. Shook my hand, offered me a seat on a leather chair that squeaked when I sat down. Asked how I was doing. I said fine, which we both knew wasn't true. I told him the whole story again. He took notes on a legal pad, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he set the pad down and explained what he thought had happened. Hypothermia-induced psychosis. That was the phrase he used. Said when core body temperature drops, the brain can malfunction, produce vivid hallucinations, false memories, paranoid delusions. Said it was common in survival situations. People saw things that weren't there, believed things that hadn't happened, constructed narratives to explain their confusion. Combined with exhaustion, dehydration, stress, and the panic of being lost, my brain had essentially invented the creature, recontextualized Phillips's behavior, created the cabin and diary as a framework to make sense of what was actually just me getting separated from my client and wandering the bush alone until I found the road. He said it very calmly, very reasonably, like he'd seen this before and knew exactly what box it fit into. I asked about the moose carcass, the bones stripped clean, the bite marks 9 inches apart. He suggested scavengers and time, said my memory of the timeline was probably distorted. I asked about Phillips's journal, the sketches I'd seen, the thermal scope with the purple lenses. He said memory is unreliable under stress, that I'd likely seen something ordinary and my brain had filled in details that fit the narrative I was constructing. I asked about the search teams finding no cabin. He said exactly. No cabin existed because I'd never actually been to one. I'd been hypothermic and lost, probably sheltered somewhere I didn't remember clearly, and my brain had supplied the false memory later. I sat there in the squeaky leather chair and realized he'd already decided. Not just him, Grace too, probably. The search teams, everyone who'd heard the story. They'd all decided the same thing. Hypothermia, confusion, psychosis, trauma. Easier than the alternative. I stopped telling the story after that. Stopped trying to convince anyone. The questions stopped too, which was a relief, and also somehow worse. I kept guiding through the fall, but my heart wasn't in it. Clients noticed. I'd lose focus mid-paddle, forget which portage we were supposed to take, spend too much time scanning tree lines instead of watching for game. One guy asked if I was feeling all right. I said yes, and took him back early, refunded half his fee. Word gets around in the guiding community. By November, the bookings had dropped off. Marvin called me in January, asked if I wanted to sell, said he'd heard I was thinking about getting out, and he was looking to expand, offered a fair price, more than fair, actually, enough to cover Emma's first-year tuition with some left over. I said yes before I'd really thought about it. We signed the papers in February. I handed over my client lists, my routes, my contacts with outfitters and floatplane pilots. Marvin shook my hand, said if I ever wanted back in to let him know. I thanked him and knew I never would. I moved south in March, London, Ontario, far enough from the bush that I didn't have to see it every day, close enough to Emma that I could visit on weekends. Got a job doing logistics for a sporting goods distributor. Warehouse work mostly. Inventory, shipping, receiving. Nothing that required decisions about routes or weather or what might be watching from the tree line. It's been fine, quiet, normal, but some nights I still wake up. Not every night, maybe once a month, sometimes less. I'll be asleep, and then I'm not, and I'm back in that clearing with the fire between me and the tree line, and Phillips is going still beside me with his rifle scope to his eye, and he's saying there, and I'm turning to look and seeing it standing 40 feet out at the edge of the light, 8 or 9 feet tall, arms too long, legs bent backward, head tilted, watching, eyes reflecting flat yellow. And I know, the same way I knew then, that it understood what we were, that it had been hunting us, that it was smart and patient and hungry in a way that didn't stop. I wake up with my heart hammering, sheets soaked, the bedroom in my London apartment completely quiet and safe and wrong. I get up, drink water, check the locks on the doors and windows even though I'm 3 stories up. Sit in the kitchen until the feeling passes. Because here's what I figured out, lying awake those nights. Some hunts end with the prey escaping. That's true. I made it out, found the road, flagged down Norman Reese, got to the hospital, survived, but I'm not free. Part of me is still out there, still in that dead country where nothing moves right and the birds don't sing. Still running through the darkness with branches whipping my face and the scream echoing behind me, and no idea if Phillips is alive or dead or if the thing is following. I survived. I'm here. I have a job and an apartment, and I visit my daughter on weekends and live a normal life. But I'm not all the way back. I don't think I ever will be.